Hello, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed our first session under the Gift to Gain series. Today, we bring to you two more powerful and gracious leaders. I think with every episode and every guest, we are really setting the benchmark high. Our today's session would be moderated by Nilambari Kulkarni, a Harvard trained industrial organizational psychologist, along with Amy Montoya, a leader in learning and development, sales enablement, and HR. In the corporate ecosystem, success is often measured through performance metrics, outcomes, and business impact. But the most important leadership tool that often goes unnoticed is storytelling. Because when leaders share their stories of learning, of setbacks, and breakthroughs, they immediately connect, they build trust, and they create an environment where people feel seen and heard. And that's where Gift to Gain comes live. So without further delay, let's hand it over to Nilambari and witness a great session ahead.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are watching or hearing us from the world. Joining us today is Amy Montoya, a leader in learning and development, sales enablement, and HR, who's consistently demonstrated that leadership is not just about holding power, but about multiplying it through her work as a training and learning strategist in organizations such as Samsung Electric and Louis Vuitton USA. We're glad to have you here, Amy. Welcome. Let's start with your leadership journey. How did your leadership begin, and how prepared do you think you were for it?
Yes, and thank you for having me. I think my leadership has, it came about over like several years and several different roles. I started my journey in the working environment back in retail many years ago, where I was like a store manager. And I think that it's a lot of these like little examples along the way that you get a taste of leadership, where you get to lead a small team and then that develops into a larger team. And, I think today it looks a lot different than what I expected it to be 20 years ago, which is really fantastic. And so for me, it's that leadership now, I hold the title of a manager, but what's really interesting is that I am essentially like an individual contributor. So in my line of work right now, I do a lot of leading through influencing. And in some regards, I think that can be, it has its own challenges, right? If you're not like leading a group of people or, you have a specific team to yourself. But it's really interesting. And I think that it's all the experiences whenever you take a moment to reflect about what happened during that time, where you could have grown, what were the opportunities that maybe you could have done better, just really help to shape the type of leader that like not only that you want to be, but that you absolutely can be. Because I think sometimes too, people think like, oh, I need to be this type of leader, and the attributes that we bring are what make us unique. It's what makes us powerful. And I think that that's really, really a blessing in the greater sense of the word.
Absolutely. So, what you're saying is it's a very reflective journey. It's a journey of influence. Do you think you were prepared for the role of leadership when you came into it?
I look back, I've been doing a lot of work recently where I've been like reflecting into these earlier years. And at that time, no. as much as I wanted to be a leader and I was like, give me the reins, like I can do this. I probably wasn't set up in the best way possible. And I think that it's more of the setup, right? That where I had some challenges. But I think the thing about being a leader too is that you don't necessarily ask for permission. You really go and you take the reins. You say like, I know where we want to go. Like I have a vision for this. And that was something that I did. And so I have to give that past version of myself some credit for it. Because I think as we get older too, we tend to take fewer risks. We want the permission. We want like the tap on the shoulder. And that's not always leadership. It's going to be, like people may recognize it in you, but it's leading through those initiatives and saying like, I've got this, and really like owning that part of yourself to get you there.
Absolutely. Leadership rarely begins when you're ready, right? It comes when there's a need, and that's the quality of leadership. When you good leader when you actually show up when there's a need. So very rarely are we prepared to be leaders, but when there's a need, when there's an initiative, when there's a vision, leadership just shows up. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So, was there a moment in your career when sharing your personal story, let's say like a challenge or a failure or a lesson that helped your team grow stronger?
Yeah, in thinking about this one, I had a moment where, like in learning and development, I've had the great privilege and opportunity to help other facilitators be better facilitators. So it was like a train the trainer type of moment. And part of that is, really resonating connection between not only like the people that you're training, but also teaching them how to find that vulnerability and connection with the people that they're about to go and train. And it can be very different situations, but that vulnerable moment was really tapping into a situation that I had about where I thought I should have been. And I always call it was like my training troll moment. And it's such like a funny name. And it really the name is like what brought the whole thing around. And I had this urge to tell this story because something had happened and it came up, and I was telling them, like, hey, like you really need to believe in yourself. It's about self-talk. Like self-talk was like the point of the conversation. And I was really trying to reinforce like the words we say matter, and the things that we say about ourselves have like a great significance. And it wasn't meeting the mark. And so that's where the story started to, come, and it was more pulled out of me. And so I shared this story that I had been, me and a peer, we had been doing a very, very similar job. And within that, this other individual got to go and do these really amazing things. Like they got to go to some more of like the fancier trainings and ones that had a little bit more like exposure to, higher leadership. And so often I would find myself on the opposite end of the spectrum, going to ones that were a little less glamorous, if you will.
Right.
And so in my mind, I had really made up this story that I was maybe not as attractive, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially like in American culture, we also equate, our qualifications as a woman with our value of how we look. And so for me, it was like, oh, well, I guess I'm just not as pretty as the other person to get to go and do these things. I'm very capable, and I knew that part, but it was this moment that I couldn't quite like connect. And so for me, that was how I adopted my self-talk to try to have this moment of self-deprecation, lighten the mood, if you will, and just kind of laugh at myself. But it became this negative thing over time. And what was interesting is I had a peer of mine who finally like stopped me and was like, you need to stop saying that. Like you are so much more than this thing that you're calling yourself. They're like, even the words that you're using are so interesting. And the moment that I did, it kind of just washed all of that other notion away, that it wasn't even about appearance. It wasn't about these other things that really, when you stepped back from it, the perspective made it look like it was intangible. Like it wasn't something that I should have been focusing on. So it really helped me just to like reframe my perspective. And in sharing that, we hit the mark, right? Like that self-talk, like really hit the mark with these individuals. And even in that moment, finding that power in that story has helped me through some other times and bringing that to other people that may have needed it as well.
I love that, finding the power, because we believe that sharing the stories of imperfection makes us appear weak as leaders or even as women. Mm-hmm. But it fosters a sense of psychological safety when you are vulnerable with your team, because it normalizes a growth trajectory. Because with ambitious goals comes challenges, with challenges comes failures. And when you normalize these failures, there's a sense that, we can learn in public as opposed to perform in fear. So there's a connection, like you said. So I love that. I mean, I love the whole journey of vulnerability to finding your power. That's a great influence to have for yourself as well as the team. So looking at the leadership philosophy, in organizations, sometimes giving is misunderstood as slowing down personal growth. From your
Mhm.
experience, how has mentoring, coaching, or advocating for others actually accelerated your own leadership journey?
And that's such a great question too, because I think like a lot of what I do, and I spent some time with this question because I do so much coaching, and this has like really been a foundational element of just my leadership journey over the past, 17 years really. But for me, it was the moment that I really went from a place of being like a leader that was responsible for other individuals, like having direct reports, to being a leader that had to move through influence. And I had a position where I came on a team where we were all managers in our titles, but it didn't have, like, no one directly reported to me. And so that became interesting, if you will, right? You deal with like people's egos. Like I came in as the brand new person. What was interesting is that I had been the only person at that point in time that had more formalized training and development around being like a learning and development professional. And so I think for me then it was that I never stopped coaching. I never stopped leading and wanting to inspire and doing all the things. And I had to remind myself that regardless if it wasn't being asked for or welcomed, to hold my integrity and continue to show up in the way that I knew that I was my best. But it also helped me to slow down, I think, a bit too, in that I think a lot of companies, they want like immediate results.
Right.
And with something like that, it was this moment of you need to build trust, and trust doesn't come overnight. And so with that, it was building trust with my teammates to where 2 years later, we were all very well synced. They would come to me, with questions. We'd regularly have coaching conversations. We'd have moments of growth and feedback between all of us. And it took time. And I think that's the thing. A lot of times people, they're not that they're not willing to put in the time, I should say, but we're expected to have quick results. And sometimes the best things we can achieve is if there's more time put in.
Absolutely. I mean, I was thinking about this question because it almost feels counterintuitive, right? But the more you elevate others, the more trust, credibility, and opportunity you naturally build to create more influence, create more well-equipped future leaders. And I love that point about slowing down, because it's not just about quick results. We want it to be more sustainable. We want it to have a long-term impact. So advocacy, coaching, mentoring has always had a lot more multifold effect than short-term impact. So I like that. I like the part about slowing down. More interesting results that way.
Well, and I think it's important too, because I think regardless of like what life stage you're in, it's also really important because we have, these individuals are coming out of, the university or college, and it's like an immediate, well, I have my degree. Like, let me show you how smart I am, right? And they want to implement all these things. Well, slow down. Like, you need, there's a lot more to take in here. But then you may have people that are like, into their career, and they join a new team, and it's the same sort of thing. Like they're feeling like this fish out of water. They think like, oh, I'm going to come in with all this experience. People are going to respect it. And oftentimes it's back to that whole credibility building, like you mentioned, and it's, you have to take time to get there.
Absolutely. Moving forward to women in leadership, women leaders often carry the additional responsibility of representation. How do you think women leaders can use their stories to create pathways for others without feeling the pressure to be perfect?
That's such a good one. It's the perfection, I think, is like the key word in that, right? Like back to even like the story I told earlier, it's like you have to have this notion of perfection in all that you do. You have to look perfect. You have to sound perfect. You have to have the perfect background. But I think, it's about, I think, communication. When we talk to people, we build these touch points with each other about like having open, honest conversations, right? When we meet people with empathy, we're able to really listen to their stories. And that's whenever we have these moments of like, oh, wow, you experienced running a team that was really complex. Like, and you start to hear these things that maybe if you were just like listening to respond versus listening to really understand, you have a moment. And I think that goes, regardless of gender too. I think, as I mentioned earlier, like there's this speed that we're always trying to hit, and empathy in that regard tends to slow us down so much.
You think so?
I think so. I think it tends to give us like a moment just to, even if it is like a brief moment, it's a lot than I think a lot of people are experiencing on any given day. That we're able to like connect with each other and really listen to somebody else's story. And we realize that maybe it's not as slow as we think it is. Like it might feel that way in the beginning, but then when we start to do it more often, it's like, oh, it was only 3 minutes to listen to that person. And if you were to say like, hey, can you take 3 minutes out of your day to hear, Andrea's story? Like, absolutely. And so I think it's just reserving time, like in say one-on-ones, to listen to other stories. But I think also like having those moments where if it's something that's significant, ask if we can share it, right? Like, hey, or ask if they would like to share it. Give them their voice back, right? Because I think oftentimes we like to speak for others, especially in leadership positions, because we feel like we have that space to do so. But that's where we're able to like pull others up in that process and say, hey, let me allow you this moment to share your story. Let me allow you to share your perspective. And it becomes more natural in how we amplify other people's voices instead of speaking for them.
I agree. I mean, what you're saying is, as women leaders, we should naturally lean into the psychological aspects of our gender, which is empathy. We have a larger emotional vocabulary. We have the mental space and the bandwidth to give others the room to be themselves. So that's what I was thinking, because it might be an unpopular opinion, but perfection is a matter of perspective. It depends on which lens you're viewing it through. I don't think representation requires perfection. I think it requires authenticity, which is what you were just mentioning. And maybe that's the shift, that's needed. Instead of being, I want to be flawless, we should be more focused on, I want to be me.
Right.
That, you are, and showing up for others, being empathetic and allowing that room to create pathways.
Well, and as you said, like authenticity, like it's right there with the vulnerability, with the empathy. Right. It's such a connection driver that, when we see people and we deem them to be authentic, genuine individuals, we're like, hey, we're more willing to follow them in leadership. And also when we see that their efforts like are authentic in helping us like raise our voices, because it's those opportunities that like, even in looking back over my career, it's like somebody saying, you know what, hey, like, I'm not going to speak for her. I'm going to let her share this idea or share how this project went. And it may be terrifying for me, but at the same time, right? Like it's the terrifying moments, the uncomfortable moments, that's where we experience growth. And I think that regardless of gender, needs to be shared. But especially for women, like I think that we think that there can only be one female voice in the room, and it's like, no, like let's drown it out, right? Like, so I'm going to speak, I'm going to pull you to speak.
Absolutely. That authenticity will create visibility, and visibility will give you the pathway. So amazing. Moving on to the organizational culture. What do you think companies can do to encourage women and all employees to share their stories, speak up, and support each other, drown out the noise with their voice, like you just said?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think one of the ways that we start to share like our achievements is checking where also like we have biases. I think what's really important is it was an exercise that I did, and whenever I did more research, whenever I was getting more educated within human resources and learning all the different biases that represent themselves whenever you go into, say, like interviewing. And it was so fascinating to see like how many of those biases come up in different areas of our life, even in how we like interact with individuals at work. And I think, sometimes we may not be aware of the fact that we're doing it, but when you start to bring that awareness around some of those biases that you may be, just you're not aware of it, right? You're in your unconscious mind is working in ways, and all of a sudden, like we have, I'm saying, oh, I want this person to speak because they're like me. Or we went to the same school, or, let's keep going to this person because I know I can always rely on them. It's a moment of self-reflection that sometimes is a tough pill to swallow, but at the same time, I think it's really important for all of us to kind of have that check, right? It's a checks and balances type of performance that we do on ourselves, because I think it can come up in different ways, right? It comes up in performance reviews, it comes up in interviews, it comes up in how we sell in ideas and have these communications in boardrooms or, project meetings. And I think that if we can, right, hold that space for it and and ask ourselves, like, are we truly being like non-biased to the best of our ability, or at least like recognizing it if it does come up? Who else can we give some space for to, share their voice, to share their story, or even to share their idea during like a project meeting?
Absolutely. I mean, it has to be more systemic than that, but when we're looking at changing a culture and making it more collaborative, it's not just a slogan or a side initiative that an organization can take, but the accountability also lies with people, where they're keeping, their awareness on point, being understanding, aware about where their biases might be coming from, and fostering a sense of collaboration and candid, respectful conversation to keep that support ongoing.
Absolutely. Well, and it's so interesting too, because I know it's like a very controversial term, especially here in the US, in terms of like, diversity of thought, like, right? Like when we're really trying to be good leaders and bring in different thoughts and ideas to make us more resilient, make us more unique in how we're approaching problems. It does take a moment to, like how you said, like, right, it could be very systemic. And it's putting our experiences through a filter to say, like, where can I get the most in order for us to be the best? And sometimes that takes putting aside like ego, or saying like, hey, like this is something that maybe, inadvertently affected me because of the way that I was brought into this organization, or, the people that I know. And it's very, it can be very heavy for certain individuals, but I think like at the end of the day, like if you're really trying to have the best experience, right? Like have the best ideas, have the best solutions, you have to break out of the old patterns. And part of that is saying like, where are we putting up these constraints of like walls, which can be biases, or, just relying on certain people to only be the ones to come to the forefront and share their ideas. And just be willing to go out of the box. And I think that's like, a lot of people might be like, well, what does out of the box mean? Like, it means breaking the walls down and trying something different, and recognizing the voices that may not have had recognition before.
Absolutely. And what you just said becomes the leadership responsibility to break out of the box, to give space for those voices, and to create innovation of not just for your goals, but also in thought. And that collaboration will automatically lead to everyone feeling supported and everyone feeling like, I have a voice here and I can speak up. So it's a chain reaction.
Absolutely.
For leaders listening today, especially managers shaping the next generation, what's one action they can take starting tomorrow to amplify voices within their team?
Really active listening and driving empathy. I know I kind of mentioned it earlier, and there's like a lot of work that I'm doing currently that is around this, but I think it's so beneficial. It allows leaders, when you start to look at it, you start to see your own patterns of communication, and it's really eye-opening. Are you really listening to your team? Like, are you are you talking at them, or are you like listening to what they have to say? Are you allowing them that space to speak and to share their ideas and to do all the things so that, like all the things that we've just talked about, that we can amplify their voice. But sometimes that takes us like stop being talking.
I completely agree. Because when I was writing down my one advice, I think you and I arrived at a similar thing. Because what I wrote down is start with something as simple and intentional as whose perspective we haven't heard today and give them a voice. Just start there. And then, as you said, start listening to those voices.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where the voices will be heard.
Absolutely. And, and it's like just waiting for the other person to stop talking before you even begin to. And it's, there's so many things that you'll uncover or, find that are brand new. And I think, when you do, sometimes like difficult things will come up. And that is part of, the empathy with it too, is, we try to come in with sympathy and have that immediate response, because we don't want it to, like, now that we've just listened, we don't want it to be uncomfortable at work. So we're going to respond sympathetically, and it drives the disconnection. And so, life spills over from like home life into work life. It's no matter what, it is what it is. And even when we try our hardest not to let that happen, like sometimes it does.
It does.
And yeah, and having those moments with the people that work with us and for us, like when it matters, and having that moment of empathy for them. Again, it doesn't have to be long. It may feel like it's super long,
but it's not.
It's not. It doesn't have to be. And the more that you practice it, just like any other skill too, you're going to get better at it. So I think, like, and again, they kind of go hand in hand, but any leader that really works to actively listen and lead with empathy has a whole new, skill set. They have that, that ace in their pocket that they can pull out, because it's going to be a differentiator, because it's not something that you're taught in school usually, unless you're on like a psychology track. But it's not something you're taught in school. It's not always taught in everyone's home. And it truly is something that, when you look at it and you do it and you practice it, you do it the right ways, you're going to be seen as authentic and genuine. You're going to be seen as somebody who's really driving the connection with your people. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of growth, and growth is going to look different. But I think I encourage every leader, like, go get a book on listening and empathy, and
start practicing it.
Yeah, the practice. Yeah, the practice is so important, because it's like with any skill. Like, you can't, just go into any job and just start coaching. Like, you have to practice coaching. If you're, manufacturing and you're building something, like, you have to practice. So yeah, it's I know that they've usually been labeled like soft skills in the past, but they're human skills. It's how we connect as humans.
I love that. I love the entire aspect of connection and authenticity. I especially like the part about stop talking so that the other can stop speaking. I love that. So it's a very actionable advice. So thank you so much, Amy, for sharing your thoughts. As we continue to stay to amplify your story, give to gain, here's a thought to leave you with. Mission grows when stories are shared. Organizations thrive when people uplift one another. And real success is created when growth is inclusive. This Women's Day, let's commit to more than celebration. Let's commit to mentorship, advocacy, and amplifying the voices that shape the future. Because when leaders give, organizations gain.